Hey guys, I know it's been a minute since we finished this book, so we are going back to this. I'm going to try to get these recordings done, and then we will return to Coming Home to Self as well. So stay tuned. Alright, so this is Madeline's story. Um, it was 1960, and I had just finished my freshman year of college. I'd gone to the University of Colorado. When I was applying to school, my parents gave me the option of either going to William and Mary, which was my grandmother's college, and I could live with her and go to school, or to the University of Colorado, where all other airline pilots' daughters were going. Now, you have to understand, I was extremely naive. I was an extremely naive young woman. I'd been out on maybe 3 or 4 dates. I knew nothing at all about the facts of life. My parents shipped me off to the University of Colorado, which was an unbelievable party school, and suddenly I was very popular. In June of 1960, I was back on Long Island at my parents' house. I had done all sorts of terrible things, like taken out a charge account and charged $500 worth of stuff at a department store. My parents were just furious with me. I was raised very strictly. We said yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. We just did everything our parents said. I had never done anything wrong in my life, and suddenly I had done all these terrible things. So I came home, and my parents insisted that I take 2 jobs so that I could pay off this debt that I had run up. I got a job as a waitress and a job as a salesgirl in a department store type place called J.J. Newberry's. The other thing was I wasn't getting my period. I had had sex. Well, I guess you could call it sex. I'd gone out on a date with someone I really liked, and he was one of the few young men whom I really trusted. He was sort of like one of my brothers. We were necking at his apartment, and I guess we had sex. I mean, he sort of pinned me to the floor, and I didn't really know what was going on. I really had no idea what was happening. He pinned me down and pretty much, raped me. Trigger warning. We had necked a few times, then this thing happened. Then the next morning, he told my girlfriend that I was nothing but a slut, and I was a bad fuck. I was a bad lay. Because all I did was lie there. So I guess you're really wonderful until they can stick it in you, and then you're just this piece of shit. I got on the plane, and I went home to New York. I didn't really understand about sex, and how babies happen, and all that business. I was 18. I didn't know. My mother never told me the facts of life. My parents were very affectionate. They hugged, they kissed, but they never told us the facts of life. So I had no idea that that's what they did with the penis, Sorry guys, I'm trying to read the accurate words here. That they put in you and you got pregnant. I didn't know. I mean, it was so embarrassing. Okay, pausing there. This is why sex education is extremely important. Now, granted, I know this was back in the 1960s, but let's face it, we're in 2024, and we have shows like 16 and Pregnant, right? Like, and that's not to bash, teen parenting, right? I understand that there's a stigma towards it and all that, and they're doing the best that they can or teen moms where they're trying to parent. But here's the thing. If we had sex education, better sex education in schools, sex education for parents on how to teach their child, better protection in terms of access, the rates go down. That's been proven, right? And with all this stuff happening in our politics, we don't care. Not we as in individuals, but we as in a society, especially the government, does not care, right? And this is why sex education is important, not just for the pregnancy part, but it's like to keep us safe, how you can prevent things, like there's so much more to it. And like constantly hearing, especially men, right? Men of all things talk about women's bodies, and I'm not just, again, not just talking about the way that the government is trying to do things. I'm talking on the individualistic level and how inaccurate they are. Or like I hear things like, well, getting your period's not normal, or having pain with your period is not normal. Excuse me, right? And it's like, who told you this? And then they fall for the jokes that women play of like, oh yeah, when we're on our period we like peel our skin and stuff. They fall for that. And they're so easily tricked, and it's hilarious. I mean, it's hilarious in the way that like all of us women tend to like gain up and like make it a joke. But like, I mean, let's be real. They don't know how to really satisfy anyway. So, yeah. And then we have the whole other part of consensual sex, right? Where, or just even talking, right? This is why, all men until it's none, right? Where if they may be interested in someone, you can say no, you can ignore them because that's your right. And then they go off on this whole, like, you're a horrible person, you're a slut, all this kind of thing. And it's like, you're proving the point. We're not safe around men, right? And like, here she said, this was a friend, this was someone she had, like which was kind of weird that she put it in that way, like a brother-sister relationship. And then as soon as he got the chance to rape, trigger warning, he completely turned on her. Like, and then, and that's, this is the other part. Then they victim blame, right? They victim blame the women. Well, were you drinking? What were you wearing? You shouldn't have been doing that. Oh, you're so easy. Things like that. And it's like, you put the blame on the woman, but never on the man. See, this is... we can go on tangents about this. Anywho, we're going to get back to the story because otherwise I'll be talking forever. But you guys get what I'm saying, right? Anyway, where was I? There I was at home. I had these 2 jobs, and I wasn't getting my period. I mean, I was just in this sort of state where I was not paying attention to reality. Then I started to get morning sickness. I would be in this place selling men's underwear and curtains in J.J. Newberry's department store, and I would be throwing up. So in the corner of my mind, I knew something was very wrong. Then I started reading books about what happened to girls who got in trouble. Then I remember being in my parents' house and standing at the top of the cellar stairs. I had pillows wrapped around my legs and arms because I thought if I threw myself down the stairs, I would somehow be able to dislodge this baby. So again, this is before abortion access. And I want to make this clear. My channel is not about abortion, okay? Like, abortion is about ending or terminating a pregnancy. That could also mean technically giving birth, like a C-section, right? Just saying. But no matter if it's easily accessible or not, people are still going to find a way, right? This is a prime example. We've heard stories in news where women were doing things to find a way. Or men, unaliving women, and they still do this because of that, because of the pregnancy. So let's just be aware that, anyway, let's continue on. So part of me was accepting the fact that I was pregnant, and another part was in total denial. I went back to school. I was 4 months pregnant, but I wasn't showing. My roommate noticed that I never used any of my Kotex, so there was this rumor that I might be in trouble, but I wasn't admitting it. Then lots of rumors started flying around the campus about me. Somehow, I was becoming a slut because of these rumors. I was accused of doing things that even now I couldn't imagine doing. I stayed with my parents the last 2 months that I was pregnant. Stayed in my grandmother's room because my grandmother didn't live there anymore. I just stayed in bed the whole time. Occasionally my mother would sneak me out in this plaid coat that went almost to the ground to take me for walks at Jones Beach. My father was just enraged. I mean, you have to imagine my father was like John Wayne. He was an Air Force colonel, and at the time, he was an airline pilot. He's a wonderful man, but everything with him was black and white. There was no gray. If you wore curlers in your hair and you go out in the street, you're a whore. So I'm there at home. None of my siblings know. Nobody could know that I'm pregnant. My mom found this Park Avenue gynecologist where all the nice, waspy, unwed girls go to be taken care of and give their babies away. So I go to see him every couple of weeks. There's no question that as soon as I deliver this baby, the baby is gone. I mean, there's no question about whether I can keep this baby. No way. I mean, it's not even considered. It's just, you have done this worst thing possible, and you better be quiet. My mom said, this is the closest your father and I have come to having problems. You're killing your father. He's got to re-qualify on the Jets now, and he can't handle it because of you. It was horrible. It was really horrible. Of course, nobody tells me a damn thing about what to expect or what giving birth is like. Nothing. There's no preparation whatsoever. That's another thing. Like, I remember being pregnant with my own son. Now, granted, this was in 2012, and I gave birth in 2013. And while I kind of knew, and like definitely more education, there were definitely things that were missing out. Like the possibility of your legs swelling. I mean, I knew it was possible, but like the aftermath, right? That was a huge thing. Or and granted, I read books, okay? Like, I'm a very well educated woman. There were things like the cord getting wrapped around the neck, and like the possibility of complications, and all sorts of, like, I had a terrible delivery. All those things, right? So there's still some lack of education even to this day, right? So I think speaking on these things, speaking on the I do see more videos of talking more about postpartum, self-care, normalizing it, because that's important, right? That's so important. Anyway, where was I? Sorry guys, I keep going off on tangents in this book. Here we were. Oh, and the night that I went into labor, we had the worst snowstorm that had ever happened in the history of New York. My mother has to call 911, and an ambulance comes, and of course all the neighbors are looking out their windows. It's her worst nightmare. They carry me out on a stretcher. My mother is making up something about my liver or my kidney or some kind of organ failure or something like that. I was supposed to deliver in New York at this fancy hospital. Well, not hospital. Not a hotel, hospital. But instead I'm taken to Mineola Hospital. There's no power. There's no generators, and they're very short-staffed. Oh my god, they're short-staffed. Whew. We're going to talk about this in a second. They're on generators, and they're very short-staffed. I can't describe it. I mean, still, when I think about what it's like, they were so cruel to me. I can't tell you how they treated me. Those nurses, it was so terrible. They lied to me. They tied me to a bed. They abused me verbally. After I delivered my baby, they left me lying in this bed with blood-stained sheets for a day and a half. Oh, that's horrible. I mean, still, even talking about it, I can understand how somebody who is supposed to be in a profession where you have compassion, I can't understand, sorry, I can't understand how somebody who is supposed to be in a profession where you have compassion and care about suffering could do that. It was like I was fair game on them. Okay, so my son was also born in the winter. It snows literally every day on his birthday. Guarantee. But just a few months prior was Hurricane Sandy. Okay. Now, at the time, I lived in New York City, right off the East River. So I was 6 months pregnant when we lost power for 10 days. Yeah. That was not fun. Not fun at all. But I do have friends who gave birth during that time, and they were telling me about their stories going to what was then Beth Israel, now it's Mount Sinai, and which doesn't have a maternity ward anymore anyway, but like it was just it was eerie. So when I went a few months later to give birth, they were still one of the few operating hospitals with a maternity ward in my neighborhood. Now there were like 4 or 5 different hospitals, right, in the like range, but everyone else had like lost power and hadn't recovered from Hurricane Sandy. So going in there to like give it was still eerie, let's just put it that way. It was just something else. And like I also was tied down, which was not fun. I had an epidural and everything, and like I wish I didn't, but I mean, like I said, like my story was a complete nightmare. So I can only imagine what she went through. But that's not how you treat someone, right? I don't care if they're the worst person in the world. Your job, your profession, right? Like, you should not be biased. They could be a serial unaliver. And I get it. People have biases, right? You don't necessarily want to take care of this person, but that's your job. You're still supposed to do your job correctly, right? Now, do your job, and then you can go cuss them out, right? Or complain to your boss, whatever it may be. But that's still your job. You're still supposed to show that person compassion. Now, in no way am I comparing a pregnant woman in crisis to a serial unaliver, okay? Like, I want to make that clear. I'm just stating that it shouldn't matter who the person is. That is your job. Okay, sorry. Anywho. So I had my daughter. I remember very clearly that the doctor in the delivery room holding her up and saying, "This is the most beautiful baby I've ever seen. She's not going to want to give this baby up." And the nurse just grabbing the baby and wrapping her up so I couldn't see her. I kept asking to see her. They wouldn't let me until it was time for my mother and father to come and take the baby to the agency. They let me come into the room where they were dressing her. It was the same nurses. They wouldn't let me hold her. They wouldn't let me touch her. I was across one of those metal tables from them, and they said, "I bet you'd like to hold this baby, wouldn't you?" Oh, God. This baby doesn't belong to you. This baby is going to have a good home. It was just horrible. It was like a terrible, terrible nightmare. The only time I got to hold her was when they let me take her to the car. I carried her down these steps, concrete steps with this kind of chrome railing, down to my parents' car. Then my mother took her, and I got into the back seat. They dropped me off at the house, and they took the baby into the city. I remember the only one I could talk to and cry to was our dog. My mom and dad came back, and they never spoke about it. My mom destroyed the papers from the adoption agency right away. All the papers having to do with my daughter. She burned everything, supposedly to protect me. It was never spoken about again. I really wanted to talk to her about it, but my mom treated it like it was her personal tragedy. I would try to broach the subject, and she would say, "You'll just never know what your father and I went through. You never know. You'll never know." And we came very close to separating at that time. Your father could have had a heart attack so easily. It was always her tragedy. My daughter was born on February 4th, and I spent that spring studying so I could go back to take my exams at the University of Colorado. I took my exams, and then I came back and went to school at Hofstra University, which was within driving distance. My parents aren't going to let me go anywhere again. What I did after that, I'm amazed I'm still alive. It was in the middle of the whole folk period. Bob Dylan made his first album. The whole hippie thing was starting. I was supposed to be a poet and an English teacher. That's what the women in my family did. You taught English for security, and you wrote poetry. I was a really good writer. But I took this art class, and that was it. I had to lie to my parents. I couldn't tell them I changed my major to art. I was going into the city all the time with my art friends, wandering around the Lower East Side. If anybody wanted to sleep with me, I would sleep with them. I had no boundaries, no sexual boundaries, no personal boundaries, nothing. I would just put myself in these incredibly dangerous situations, and it was almost like I wanted to be destroyed. I just wanted it to be over. I was filled with this most incredible rage that lasted until I was reunited with my daughter. I was fueled by rage for all those years. This was a time when you could channel it into political protest and the women's movement, and so many other things. But it was really just this unbelievable rage at what had happened and this feeling of being totally powerless. So pausing there, that is a huge trauma response, something that is very common for rape victims, as well as adoptees, as well as like just trauma survivors. It is a form of self-sabotage, right? And hypersexuality and all of those things. And I just want to make that aware that that is a very normal response. Okay? Very normal. Therapy would have been better. But as we know, how people are treated, they demonize us, right? So just putting that out there. Anyway, continuing on. I met this guy at school, and we wound up married to each other for a year. He was a poet. He got me to see someone who could help me. And it's a good thing he did, because I was really losing it. I really was very, very disturbed. My parents had no idea that anything was wrong. When my mother found out I was in therapy, she was furious at me because I was telling my business to these people. I think that on a core level, I felt so worthless for giving my baby away. Not that she had a choice, right? I was so beyond redemption that I just deserved nothing. Though I appeared to be very successful, I lived a life of complete lack inside. I couldn't have what regular people had. I could not have a home, for instance. I could not have something like a washing machine, anything that would make my life easier. That wasn't for me. I could not have anything because I really didn't deserve anything. I never had other children. When I got married for that 1 year, everyone started asking me when I was going to have a baby. If I had a machine gun, I would have just gone out and unalived an entire city block full of people. I was so enraged because that's when it hit me. It was just a social convention. It had nothing to do with anything. Then later, when people like Madonna were having babies and keeping them, it was trendy. It made me so angry because it was just a matter of years. And now it's okay. Then it was the worst thing imaginable. I also think that because Madonna was famous, that made a huge impact, right? If that makes sense. I have been very angry for a long time. It didn't start out this way as a child. I feel like I lost my mind. It's funny. It's in a funny kind of way. My mom got Alzheimer's toward the end of her life and died in 1998. 5 days after she died, my daughter called me on the phone. I had been looking for her for years. I contacted the agency in New York, and they said all the paperwork from that era had been burned. Of course they did, because they don't care, right? They don't care about us. And I bet they falsified a lot of those things. I had no information except I knew her birth date, where she had been born, and the same name that had been put on her birth certificate. Then I saw something on television about adoption reunions and the Soundex registry, so I registered. As it turns out, my daughter had also seen that program on the Soundex registry, and she sent for her paperwork, but she hadn't sent for the papers in because she thought she didn't have enough information. So she held on to them and she held on to them. Sorry, she repeated that twice. Then she said she woke up one morning and said, I've got to fill those papers out. She put all the information that she had on the papers and mailed them. I think they called her that day. My mom died. So 5 days later, I was teaching and I came home and I was really, really tired. I came in the door and my husband said, sit down, I have some news for you. And I said, oh, for Christ's sake, can't you just let me get in the door? I'm so tired. He said, no, you're really going to want to hear this. I said, look, just give me a chance to take my coat off at least. He said, your daughter called. And I felt like I was going to throw up. I just had all these mixed emotions. I thought about it for so long, but then when it happened, I was just terrified and excited. These two parts of me were coming into collision. The part of me that felt like this horrible slug underneath a rock that didn't deserve to peek up into the sunlight, and that part of me that was just, oh boy, we're kind of coming against each other. He said, you should call her back. And I said, I can't. I can't. I just can't call her back. And he said, you should call her. And I said, I don't think I can. I don't think I can. Tell me everything she said. He said, she called and asked for me. And he said, she's not home right now. She's teaching a class. And my daughter had said, what is she teaching? And my husband said she's teaching painting. And she said she got so excited because she had been raised by two scientists. She was this very creative child in a family of scientists. Okay, I'm about to cry. So this was she was very excited to find out her mother was an artist. Later, she told me she had never heard anybody speak about somebody with so much love as my husband did about me, which was really sweet. The first time I drove over to meet her, it was really a shock to see how close she'd been all those years. We found out that we both used to jog at the same reservoir, and we both took classes at the same college at the same time. I mean, that's just strange, right? I think that there's this thread running through my life that I probably came into this life with this issue of betrayal. That's something I feel as is a big issue for me. I feel like my parents betrayed me and then betrayed my daughter by not being strong enough to keep her. So many of the decisions I made in my life involved not betraying her again. I could never have other children because that would be a betrayal of my daughter. because I betrayed her. I really did not deserve to have too much. I should work very, very hard. I should do a lot of things for other people. I should let this force of compassion and protection, especially for other women. For many years, I taught courses for women in creativity, in writing, in meditation, and in visual art. I would nurture other women, especially women who didn't have a voice. I felt a real sense of responsibility to nurture at my own expense, at my own creative expense. I let people take things from me. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a moment to give some commentary. Notice how Madeline, the birth mother, is describing how close her daughter was, not just physically, but those things of creativity, of doing the same things. When we talk about nurture versus nature, this is what I mean. Right? This is nature. So you're often going to hear stories like this, or like in my own reunion, sorry guys, how those little things, like, for example, I know I've told stories over the years, or over recording, whatever, but, things like, I had a natural sense of riding horses, right? My dad was technically a cowboy. He bred horses and rode. My birth mom also rode. Now, granted, both my adoptive parents also rode, so there was also that, but I'm going to give it to my birth parents. My creative side. My entire birth mother side, creative. My birth mother being a cake artist. Me going into pastry and baking arts. Me loving Victorian farmhouses. Her growing up in a Victorian farmhouse. Me loving ghost hunting and feeling this weird connection to cemeteries. I know that sounds weird. Her doing the same thing. There's just little things that, like, you don't realize that you're doing that immediately connect to your biological side, right? And I'm talking little things. Now, on a bigger sense, right? So she said they were physically close, right? I am still not physically close. I'm halfway across the country. All right. But I also grew up in New York City, as I mentioned. I never felt like the city was home to me. Never. I take trips to Maine. I now live upstate New York. I lived in Texas. I lived in Louisiana. All of those places felt more like home than New York City ever did. And I think in part it's because my biological family grew up in, like, on the cusp, suburban, rural area in Kansas, right? Or Arizona. My biological father's side, some of them lived on the reservation. And the connection to the mountains, the connection to nature, the farm, like the smells, that all resonates with me, right? Or like in Maine, not that we're near farms, we're by the ocean, but it's that calming force, right? It's still that nature side. So there's also, funny enough, again, we're talking nature, not nurture. For the longest time, I would not eat seafood. Like, I would not eat seafood. I'm not allergic, but I would not eat it. And at the time, my excuse, right, this was funny, was, well, I want to be a marine biologist, so I refuse to eat seafood. Which, okay, fair enough point. And then finding later on that my indigenous side, my tribe, doesn't typically eat seafood because, well, one, they're not anywhere near the ocean, but two, they find sea animals like sacred. Like they don't really eat things like that. So it's just kind of funny. Like, just little things, like, okay, like little connections. Anyway, sorry guys, I just went off on a tangent, but I just wanted you guys to, like, realize that this is way more common than you realize. Alright, where was I? Here we go. I always felt like there was a huge scale and that I could never balance it. I held myself responsible. I had so many mixed feelings. I wanted to keep this baby. I felt powerless to keep this baby. I wanted it to be over. I wanted to go back to being a normal person. I wanted the baby out of my life. I wanted the baby. I didn't want the baby. I think it's the ambivalence that is so hard for people to look at and admit. Most people will say, oh, I wanted my baby with all my heart, and they took the baby from me, and they turned themselves into a victim. Well, it's true. I mean, you were coerced, you were forced, you had no choice, so you technically are a victim. That's my commentary on that, but let's continue. Anytime you get yourself into a situation like this, you have to see where you were partially responsible for it. It's a two-way thing. I've been in a lot of situations like that. I've been in situations where it seems as though I'm the victim, but in reality I'm part of the equation. I think a lot of it started with that terrible betrayal that I felt by not wanting my daughter. So much so that I would have done anything to keep her, like, run away, run out of the hospital, take the baby. It's like I let them take her. I let those nurses take her. I let my parents drive away with her. I let them do it because part of me wanted them to take responsibility for making a decision that I couldn't make myself. I think that's where the horrible guilt comes from. It's not so much the act of surrendering, it's the passivity. It's allowing someone else to take control. When they take control, they are also taking responsibility. You can slide so easily into the victim role and just say, that's just this terrible thing that was done to me. Okay, I see where she's coming from. It's the taking accountability for the lack of action. That's definitely something that I want to discuss in the future when it comes to birth parents, and the reunion and what adoptees need, because I completely understand where she's coming from now, right? Because she technically is a victim, right? Or I hate the word victim. She's a survivor, right? She was coerced, she was forced, she didn't really have a choice, right? What was she going to do? Fight them off? They're still going to do it, right? But at the same time, she's saying, like, hey, I could have at least tried, right? And so I understand where she's coming from. So she's taking accountability in that part where I'm trying to explain this in the best way possible. Even though it really wasn't her decision, she was still technically an adult, whereas the baby was not, right? The baby had no choice, right? So, alright. But the fact that there is this complicity there that you have to look at, and that's been another theme that runs through my life, it's been really hard for me to face that. That's the hardest thing for me. And it's a really rough lesson to learn. It's really hard to be very, very honest with yourself and look at yourself and see things that are not so nice. I think that's something that is really important. I don't see people talking about that. I don't think people want to look at that, I think it's so much easier to just say, I thought the best thing for my child would be to do this. I'm sorry. I have to say, I respect people who say that, but I find it hard to believe that anybody in that circumstance is so mature that they are thinking of what is best for their child. I think most people are surviving, and that's the thing where they're so ashamed of. They're so ashamed that they're thinking of their own survival. The rock bottom reality is you were thinking of your own survival more than your child's. Once you realize that, it does something to you. It's like you've been put to a kind of test and you failed. You failed, so you punish yourself for a long time until you can get to a place where you can't go any lower. And there's something very liberating about that, because then you start coming back up out of it. You begin to see who and what you are, and you begin to see the importance of the Dharma and the importance of acting according to your principles, and the importance of doing what you know is right. I know in my heart I would never betray a trust again. Never. If someone said to me, your life will end right this minute and your daughter will be well, she'll be over her myasthenia, I don't even know if I said that right. I wouldn't even hesitate for a minute. It's not because I'm some great soul or some highly advanced being. It's just that I know it's important now, and I will never compromise again. In some ways, I wonder what kind of person I would have been if I had never lost my daughter. I would not have been this person I am now. I don't like to see people with power abusing other people. I don't like to see cruelty toward people or animals. I really hate cynicism and academic nastiness and all those little cruelties that people perpetuate on each other. I just have no tolerance for it. Neither do I, by the way. I think this whole experience has made me incredibly strong. But if I had not been reunited with my daughter, I don't think it would have made me so strong. I think I would have continued to be very, very, very angry until I died of a heart attack. After my daughter and I were reunited, she and her husband came to our loft. I showed her pictures of my amnesian cat, Gaty, who had died. This cat was so beautiful, and she said, "Oh, I just love these cats. You should get another." And I said, "I'm saving up because I want to get 2, and they're expensive." So she and my husband, from November through Christmas, were doing all this stuff to locate breeders to get me amnesian cats. It comes time for my birthday, and she calls and she says she's got this present for me, and it's in Newton. A woman there is making it. It's something handmade, and I should go and pick it up. I hung up, and I'm thinking, Newton, and it's handmade. What if she got me something like a kitchen witch or something like that? Something really horrible. What am I going to do if it's really ugly? We drive into this development of split level houses, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what kind of thing is this woman making? We come up to the house, and I see these 2 little heads sticking up, and it's cats. And I said to my husband, oh my God, look, she's got cats. Look, they're amnesian. This is so exciting. So we go in, and she says, I'm finishing your present upstairs. And I said, you just take your time, I'll play with your cats. There are all these amnesian cats, and I'm so excited. I'm playing with them. And my husband looks at me like, what's wrong with you? And I'm just so happy she's going to take her time making her kitchen witch upstairs, and I can play with her cats. Then the phone rings, and it's my daughter calling from LA. And she says, how do you like your present? And I said, well, she's upstairs finishing it right now, so I haven't seen it yet. She says, don't you see your present? And I said, well, it's handmade, isn't it? She said, yes, it's made by God. And then I got it. She said, it's cats, 2 cats. She couldn't believe that I would go there and be sitting there with all these cats all over me and not think she had gotten them for me. She asked me about it later. She said, "How could you not know that they were for you?" I'm sorry. She really thought it was homemade. Oh my god, I'm crying. And I said, "Listen, I've gotten to the point in my life that when I see something I really long for, I know it's not for me." That's when I realized what losing her had done. My expectation was that what I wanted was going to be held up in front of me, and I was going to look at it, but could never have it. Just like the nurses holding her. That's what it does. Alright, so that is the end of the chapter. Before we go into chapter 9 of this book, particularly, which talks about search and reunion. Now, I think that how this birth mother Madeline feels is exactly how a lot of adoptees also feel, right? This feeling unworthy, this undeserved love, success, we suffer from so much. But I think listening to these different stories and listening to birth mothers, whether you're on TikTok or Facebook or whatever other social media platform you're on, is going to be beneficial, right? But I want you guys to also remember that just because they're not your birth mom doesn't mean that they haven't been trying to do the work and heal. That they aren't trying to do what's best for their biological child, right? And we can't place our anger per se on them, right? So I was having a conversation with a birth mom yesterday who's been doing the work, right? And she said herself, there are adoptees on, this was on TikTok, on the app that just place their feelings on her, and it feels kind of unfair. And she's right. We sometimes find someone that's similar to our birth mom or birth parent, whatever it may be, and then put that on them, right? And that's unfair. So I think we have to kind of sometimes step back, listen to their story, and process it in as best of an unbiased opinion as possible, if that makes sense, right? Now, that's not to say that maybe a birth mom could use advice, right? Where, hey, taking accountability is going to be beneficial even though you are still a survivor, right? And I think that's where Madeline, the birth mom in the story, was saying. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. I will see you guys next time. Be sure to listen to the other readings.